The mother-in-law only came because she never turns down a free dinner. That was the sentence my son-in-law chose to broadcast into a microphone on the night he celebrated his promotion to regional director. The ballroom at the Lakeshore Grand Hotel sparkled under crystal chandeliers, round tables dressed in white linen and gold centerpieces, waiters moving quietly with trays of champagne that probably cost more per bottle than I spend on groceries in a week. I had driven 45 minutes from my quiet suburb outside Chicago, my hand steady on the steering wheel, telling myself how proud I was of Daniel. I wore a navy dress I'd bought just 2 days earlier, something modest but elegant, and low heels sensible enough for standing through speeches. In my purse was a handwritten card congratulating him on his achievement, and a small envelope containing a check, something extra, something personal, because I believed family celebrations deserved more than polite applause. When Daniel first stepped onto the small stage at the front of the room, the applause was warm and generous. He looked confident in his tailored gray suit, one hand casually in his pocket, the other gripping the microphone, as if he had been waiting his whole life for this spotlight. He thanked his colleagues, his mentors, the executive board. He thanked my daughter, Emily, for putting up with the long hours. Then he glanced in my direction, a smile tugging at the corner of his mouth, and said, "And of course, my mother-in-law made sure to be here tonight. She never misses a free dinner." Laughter rolled across the room like polite thunder. Not cruel laughter. Not even loud. Just enough. Enough to let me know I had been repositioned in that moment, from guest to punchline. I kept smiling. I even lifted my glass slightly, as if I agreed. Years of hosting dinner parties, church fundraisers, neighborhood barbecues had taught me how to hold a smile in place even when it felt too heavy for my face. I noticed small things instead of my own reaction. The way Emily stared down at the tablecloth, tracing the rim of her wine glass with one finger. The way a woman at the next table looked at me quickly and then away. The way Daniel continued speaking without a pause, as though he had simply delivered a harmless joke and moved on. The truth is, I don't drink much. I never cared for expensive steak dinners or open bars. I came because he is married to my daughter. I came because when someone builds a career, the people who supported them from the beginning are supposed to stand in the room and clap. I came because 5 years ago, when Daniel and Emily couldn't secure the mortgage on their first home, I was the one who agreed to co-sign. I remember sitting in that bank office, fluorescent lights humming overhead, the loan officer explaining interest rates and monthly payments. Daniel had squeezed my hand that day and said, "Thank you, Margaret. We couldn't do this without you." Tonight, he made it sound like I had shown up for shrimp cocktail. I shifted my purse slightly on my lap, feeling the edge of the envelope inside. The check suddenly seemed unnecessary. Generosity offered in private rarely survives humiliation delivered in public. But I didn't stand up. I didn't leave. I stayed seated while the applause swelled again, steady and obedient. Daniel lifted his glass for a final toast, and everyone followed. I raised mine too. My reflection shimmered faintly in the surface of the champagne. Silver hair neatly styled, lipstick still intact, eyes calm. I have learned something over the years. When someone shows you how they see you, believe them. But also remember what they might have forgotten. Daniel believes tonight is about his success. He believes the microphone makes him untouchable. He believes kindness is a small thing, easily dismissed with a joke. What he doesn't know is that signatures matter. Contracts matter. And sometimes the quietest person in the room is the one who understands the fine print best. I took a slow sip of champagne, letting the bubbles settle, and listened as the music started up again. The party resumed as if nothing unusual had happened. But something had shifted, even if only inside me. I did not come for a free dinner. I came because I once believed I was family. And before this night is over, I will decide exactly what that word means. I did not leave early that night. I stayed until the dessert plates were cleared and the music softened into something almost sentimental. I even walked up to Daniel when the crowd thinned and handed him the card from my purse. He accepted it with a distracted smile, the kind reserved for acquaintances, not family. Emily stood beside him, her hand resting lightly on his arm, her eyes searching my face for something I did not give her. If she expected hurt, she did not see it. If she expected anger, she did not hear it. I told him congratulations. I told him I hoped the new position brought him the satisfaction he had been working toward. My voice did not shake. Years of experience have taught me that composure unsettles people more than confrontation ever could. When I finally stepped outside into the cool night air, the city lights reflected off Lake Michigan in long silver streaks. I paused for a moment beside my car, breathing in the crisp wind, letting the quiet settle around me. The laughter from the ballroom was muffled now, distant. Inside, Daniel was likely still shaking hands, still repeating his speech in smaller circles, still enjoying the version of himself that the microphone had amplified. I drove home carefully, the highway nearly empty at that hour. The radio remained off. I prefer silence when I am thinking. There are moments in life when something small rearranges the furniture of your understanding. A joke, a glance, a sentence spoken too casually. It does not break anything immediately. It simply reveals the cracks that were already there. I thought back to the early years of Emily and Daniel's marriage. Sunday dinners at my house. Daniel asking for advice about work. The night they called to tell me they had been denied for the mortgage and did not know what to do. I remember how worried Emily sounded. I remember telling her that families support one another. I did not hesitate to sign those papers. I did not calculate risk. I trusted character. Trust is quiet. It does not announce itself. It shows up in bank offices and holiday gatherings and hospital waiting rooms. It writes checks without expecting applause. When I pulled into my driveway, the porch light I always leave on glowed softly against the siding. My house is modest. 2 bedrooms. A small garden I maintain myself. It has never impressed anyone, but it has always felt steady. Inside, I placed my purse on the kitchen counter and removed the empty envelope that had once held the check. I set it down beside the sink and looked at it for a long moment. Generosity, given without respect, slowly becomes permission. I poured myself a glass of water and sat at the kitchen table, the same oak table where Emily once did her homework, where birthday cakes were cut, where we once mapped out her wedding guest list. I do not believe in dramatic gestures. I believe in decisions. The kind made quietly, after the dishes are washed and the house is still. I open the folder in my desk drawer where I keep important documents. Insurance policies. Property tax statements. The mortgage agreement from 5 years ago. My signature was there in blue ink, steady and unmistakable. The terms had not changed. My responsibility had not disappeared simply because Daniel now held a more impressive title at work. I closed the folder gently and returned it to its place. Nothing needed to be rushed. Nothing needed to be announced. But something needed to be reconsidered. Respect is not measured by income. It is measured by how you speak about someone when they cannot defend themselves. Tonight, Daniel had spoken freely, confident that I would absorb the remark and smile. He was correct about one thing. I did smile. What he did not understand is that a smile does not always mean acceptance. Sometimes it means the calculation has begun. I turned off the kitchen light and headed upstairs, removing my earrings and placing them carefully on the dresser. In the mirror, I studied my reflection again. The same silver hair. The same calm eyes. I did not look humiliated. I looked certain. And certainty, I have learned, is far more powerful than applause. The next morning I woke before the alarm, not because I had slept badly, but because my mind had already arranged itself around a decision. Sunlight filtered through the blinds in thin, measured lines, touching the hardwood floor at the foot of my bed. I lay there for a moment, listening to the ordinary sounds of my house, the hum of the refrigerator downstairs, the faint ticking of the hallway clock. Nothing dramatic had happened. No doors had slammed. No voices had been raised. Yet something fundamental had shifted. I rose, made my bed with deliberate care, and went downstairs to prepare coffee. The routine steadied me. 1 scoop of grounds, filtered water filled to the 12-cup line, the soft click of the machine beginning its cycle. I do not believe in reacting while emotions are still warm. Warm emotions cloud judgment. Cool reflection sharpens it. While the coffee brewed, I opened my laptop at the kitchen table and reviewed my monthly finances. Retirement savings. Social Security deposit schedule. Property taxes due in October. I have always kept careful records. Daniel once joked that I treated spreadsheets like hobbies. He did not understand that organization is a form of independence. When you know exactly what you have, you also know exactly what you can withdraw. After breakfast, I retrieved the mortgage folder again. 5 years ago, when I signed as co-borrower, Daniel's credit score had not met the threshold for the interest rate they wanted. Emily had been nervous. I remember reassuring her that this was temporary, that Daniel was ambitious and that promotions would come. I believed that progress would be accompanied by gratitude. I scanned the document carefully. My name remained listed. My liability remained active. My leverage remained intact. I closed the folder and reached for my phone. I did not call Emily. I did not call Daniel. I called the bank. The representative who answered introduced herself as Karen. Her voice was polite, efficient. I explained that I was reviewing my financial exposure and wanted clarification on my rights as a co-borrower. I spoke evenly, without complaint or accusation. Karen confirmed that as long as my name was attached to the loan, I retained certain options regarding refinancing or restructuring. I thanked her and wrote down the details in neat handwriting on a yellow legal pad. Information first. Action later. After the call, I stepped outside into my backyard. The roses along the fence were in full bloom, their petals bright against the green leaves. I have always found comfort in tending to things that grow slowly. Plants do not rush. They do not perform for applause. They respond to steady care. As I watered them, I thought about Daniel's laughter the night before. Not the words themselves, but the confidence behind them. The assumption that I would remain in the background, grateful to be invited. Confidence can be admirable. Arrogance is simply confidence without awareness. By mid-morning, my phone vibrated on the counter. Emily's name appeared on the screen. I let it ring twice before answering. Her voice sounded careful. She asked if I had gotten home safely. I said, yes. She paused, then mentioned that Daniel had been joking and that everyone had laughed. I told her I understood. I did not mention the bank. I did not mention the folder. Silence can protect more than pride. We ended the call with polite warmth, the kind that schemes across the surface without disturbing what lies beneath. When I hung up, I felt no anger, only clarity. Support is not an unlimited resource. It is a choice, renewed or withdrawn based on how it is treated. Daniel believes his promotion elevated him. Perhaps it did. But elevation can create distance. And distance, I have learned, reveals exactly who is standing on solid ground and who is balanced on borrowed strength. I rinsed my coffee cup, dried it carefully, and placed it back in the cabinet. The house remained quiet, but the quiet no longer felt uncertain. It felt deliberate. I had smiled in that ballroom. I had applauded. And now, without raising my voice or lowering my standards, I was preparing to redefine what my presence in their lives would truly cost. 2 days later, I requested a formal appointment with the bank branch manager. I chose a Thursday morning at 10:30, a time when offices are calm and people are less rushed. I wore a light gray blazer and carried the same leather folder I had kept for years, its edges slightly worn but still sturdy. The bank lobby smelled faintly of polished wood and brewed coffee. I have always appreciated places where numbers are taken seriously. They do not laugh. They do not improvise. They record. The manager, a man in his early 40s named Thomas Keller, greeted me with professional courtesy and led me into a glass-walled office. I explained that I was reviewing my financial exposure on the mortgage I had co-signed 5 years ago and wanted to understand my options moving forward. I did not mention embarrassment. I did not mention jokes. I spoke about responsibility and long-term planning. Thomas pulled up the file on his computer and confirmed what Karen had told me over the phone. As a co-borrower, I had the right to request a refinancing review. I had the right to remove myself from the loan if certain conditions were met. I also had the right to decline continued involvement if the primary borrowers did not meet updated lending standards independently. His tone remained neutral, but the information itself carried weight. I asked him to begin a formal review process. Nothing dramatic, just a review. He printed a few preliminary documents and slid them across the desk. I signed where required, my signature steady, identical to the one I had placed there 5 years earlier. When I left the bank, the sky was clear and bright. The world had not shifted. Traffic moved normally. People carried coffee cups and checked their phones. But a quiet mechanism had begun turning. That afternoon, I received a brief email confirmation stating that the review had been initiated and that the primary borrowers would be contacted for updated income verification and credit evaluation. I read the message twice and then closed my laptop. I did not feel vindictive. I felt aligned. Support is meaningful when it is respected. When it becomes material for public amusement, it deserves reconsideration. That evening, Emily called again. Her voice sounded tighter than before. She said they had received a notification from the bank requesting updated financial documentation. She asked if I knew anything about it. I told her calmly that I had requested a routine review of my financial commitments. There was a long pause. She said Daniel was confused and slightly irritated. I told her confusion often follows assumptions. I did not raise my voice. I did not accuse her husband of disrespect. I simply explained that I was nearing 70 and needed to reassess my obligations. Silence stretched between us, not hostile, but heavy. Emily finally said she understood that I had the right to make decisions about my own finances. I told her that rights are not weapons. They are boundaries. After we ended the call, I sat in my living room with the late afternoon sun casting warm light across the carpet. I thought about the night of the party again, about the ease with which Daniel had turned gratitude into entertainment. He believed the room belonged to him because he held the microphone. He did not realize that the mortgage document held far more power than any sound system ever could. By the next morning, Daniel called me directly. His voice was controlled, but the confidence I had heard in the ballroom was absent. He asked if something was wrong. I told him nothing was wrong. I told him I was simply ensuring that everyone standing on the loan was standing on equal ground. He said refinancing might affect their interest rate. I responded that financial independence always comes with adjustments. The call ended politely. No raised voices. No threats. Just reality settling where assumption once stood. I poured myself a cup of tea and looked out at my garden again. The roses were steady, unchanged by speeches or promotions. I have learned that dignity does not need volume. It needs action. Daniel once thanked me in a quiet bank office for believing in him. Now he would have the opportunity to prove that belief was not misplaced. And if he could not, then at least the paperwork would finally reflect the truth about who was carrying the weight. 3 days after the bank initiated the review, the atmosphere shifted from confusion to urgency. I could hear it in Emily's breathing when she called me late in the afternoon, her voice careful but strained. She explained that Daniel had spoken with their mortgage advisor and learned that without my co-borrower status, their interest rate could increase significantly, especially with current market conditions. She mentioned percentages and monthly payments that would rise by several $100s. I listened quietly, letting her finish. Money has a way of clarifying conversations that emotions often complicate. She said they were gathering paperwork to prove Daniel's recent promotion would qualify them independently. I told her that was good news. Promotions are meant to strengthen foundations, not just egos. There was another pause. This one longer. Emily finally asked if this was about the party. I did not answer immediately. Instead, I asked her if she remembered the day we sat in that bank office 5 years ago. I reminded her how worried she had been. I reminded her how Daniel had thanked me for trusting him. I told her I had not forgotten that moment. Gratitude once spoken should not expire simply because circumstances improve. She said Daniel had not meant to embarrass me. I told her intention and impact are rarely identical. That evening Daniel called again. His tone was polite, but there was an edge of calculation beneath it. He explained that refinancing would involve fees, new appraisals, possible restructuring. He said he wished I had spoken to him first. I told him I had spoken to him. I had spoken that night of the party by smiling and staying seated. Some messages are delivered in silence. He exhaled audibly. Then he asked if there was a way to resolve this without formal changes to the loan. I told him that resolution depends on respect. He grew quiet after that. For the first time since I have known him, he did not fill the silence with confident explanations. He asked what I wanted. The question was simple, but it carried weight. I told him I wanted acknowledgement, not performance. I wanted him to understand that support is not comedy material. I did not demand an apology. I did not threaten further action. I simply stated that I would complete the review process and that the outcome would reflect what I believed was appropriate for my own financial security. After the call ended, I sat in my living room with a cup of chamomile tea. The house felt steady, unchanged. Outside, a light breeze moved through the trees, and the sky was beginning to soften into evening. I did not feel triumph. I felt equilibrium. When you remove yourself from the role of silent benefactor, you allow others to see the true cost of what they have taken for granted. The next morning I received an email from Thomas at the bank confirming that updated documents had been submitted and that an evaluation was underway. Numbers would determine the outcome now. Income statements, credit history, debt-to-income ratios. Facts do not laugh. Facts do not applaud. They measure. Later that afternoon, Daniel sent a brief text message asking if we could meet for dinner, just the three of us. I read the message twice before responding. I agreed to meet at a quiet Italian restaurant halfway between our homes. I suggested Sunday at 6:30. His reply came quickly. Thank you. Two simple words. Perhaps sincere. Perhaps strategic. I set my phone down and returned to trimming the roses in my backyard. A few petals had begun to fall naturally, not from damage but from maturity. Growth always requires shedding something. As I worked, I considered the difference between humiliation and instruction. Humiliation seeks to diminish. Instruction reveals consequence. I have no interest in diminishing Daniel, but I am very interested in teaching him the difference between holding a microphone and holding responsibility. By Sunday evening, he would understand that the quiet woman at the edge of the ballroom had never been there for a free dinner. She had been there because she believed in family. And belief, when mishandled, becomes leverage. Sunday evening arrived with the kind of quiet dignity that only late summer can carry. The Italian restaurant sat on a corner just off the main street. Warm light glowing through wide front windows, the scent of garlic and fresh bread drifting out each time the door opened. I arrived 5 minutes early. I prefer that. It allows me to settle into a space before conversation begins. I chose a small table near the back, not hidden, but not exposed. When Daniel and Emily walked in together, I noticed the difference immediately. Daniel's posture was still upright, but the easy swagger I had seen at the ballroom was gone. Emily offered me a brief hug, her arms light around my shoulders, as though unsure how firmly she was permitted to hold me. We ordered water first. No wine. No celebratory tone. Just 3 glasses placed quietly on the table between us. Daniel began by thanking me for meeting with them. His voice was measured, careful. He said he had reflected on what happened at the party. He admitted that the remark had been unnecessary. He said he had been trying to be humorous, that the room felt energetic, that sometimes he misjudges timing. I listened without interrupting. Apologies reveal more in their structure than in their volume. I asked him one question. I asked whether he would have made the same joke if I had not co-signed his mortgage. He hesitated. That hesitation told me everything. He answered that he had not thought about it that way. I told him that was precisely the problem. Thoughtlessness disguised as humor often carries the sharpest edge. The waiter arrived with bread and olive oil, placing the basket between us. Daniel reached for a piece, then paused, as if even that small gesture required permission. He said he never intended to diminish what I had done for them. He said he respected me. I told him respect is not something you feel privately while performing the opposite publicly. Respect is visible. It is audible. It is consistent. Emily's eyes filled slightly, not with tears, but with recognition. She said she should have spoken up that night. I told her I did not need defense. I needed awareness. Daniel cleared his throat and asked directly whether I planned to remove myself from the mortgage. There it was. The real question. Not about feelings. About stability. I told him the bank was reviewing the file and that I would make my final decision based on what the numbers showed. I explained that at my age, I must prioritize financial clarity. I said it calmly, without accusation. Daniel nodded slowly. He said he understood. He said he had underestimated how that comment might land. I told him I did not expect perfection. I expect recognition. We ordered dinner. Simple meals. Pasta for Emily. Grilled salmon for Daniel. A small salad for me. The conversation shifted to practical matters. Interest rates. Payment schedules. Budget projections. For the first time, Daniel spoke to me not as background support, but as a stakeholder. There was no microphone. No audience. Just responsibility sitting plainly at the table. After the plates were cleared, Daniel placed his hands flat on the table and said, clearly, that he was sorry. No explanation attached. No laughter to soften it. Just the words. I studied his expression. It was not theatrical. It was restrained. Perhaps sincere. Perhaps necessary. Sometimes the reason does not matter as much as the change. I told him I accepted the apology. I also told him that trust rebuilds through behavior, not statements. As we stood to leave, Daniel insisted on paying the bill. I allowed it. Not because I needed the gesture, but because gestures have their place when correctly understood. Outside, the evening air felt steady. Emily hugged me again, this time with more certainty. Daniel shook my hand, firm but not dominant. As I drove home, I realized something important. Power does not always announce itself. Sometimes it simply shifts seats at the table. And for the first time since that ballroom speech, I knew exactly where I was sitting. Monday morning began with a call from Thomas at the bank. His tone was neutral, professional, the way people speak when numbers have settled into place. He explained that Daniel's recent promotion had improved their income profile, but their overall debt-to-income ratio remained higher than ideal without my co-borrower status. Refinancing independently was possible, but it would require a higher interest rate and additional fees to close the gap. I thanked him for the clarity and asked him to send the full breakdown in writing. Facts are easier to evaluate when they are printed in black and white. After we ended the call, I sat at my kitchen table with the morning light spreading across the surface like a quiet spotlight. I felt no urgency, only confirmation. Later that afternoon, Daniel called again. His voice carried a different weight this time. Not irritation, not calculation, something closer to humility. He said they had reviewed the numbers and understood the financial impact if I chose to remove myself. He admitted that he had underestimated the long-term consequences of relying on my support. I listened carefully. Words matter most when they are stripped of performance. He said he did not want our relationship defined by a contract. He said he wanted it defined by respect. I asked him what respect looked like to him. He paused before answering. He said it meant acknowledging publicly what had been given privately. It meant not turning gratitude into humor. It meant ensuring that Emily never felt divided between us. His answer was not perfect, but it was thoughtful. I told him I appreciated the reflection. I also told him that growth is measured not by how quickly someone apologizes, but by how consistently they change. We agreed that I would wait for the final written assessment from the bank before making any formal decision. That evening, Emily stopped by my house alone. She brought a small bouquet of white lilies, my favorite. She placed them in a glass vase on the kitchen counter while I prepared tea. She said she had spoken with Daniel at length over the weekend. She said he understood now that humor at someone else's expense often reveals more about the speaker than the subject. I smiled slightly at that. Emily has always been perceptive, even when she hesitates to act. We sat at the table and talked not about loans or percentages, but about family. She told me she had felt uncomfortable that night, but had not known how to intervene without escalating the situation. I told her that silence can protect peace, but it can also protect disrespect. She nodded slowly. We did not dwell on regret. Regret is useful only if it leads to adjustment. When she left, she hugged me tightly, no hesitation this time. The house felt calm again. The tension that had entered through a single careless sentence had transformed into something more solid. By Wednesday, the full report from the bank arrived in my email. I printed it and reviewed each page carefully. Daniel and Emily could manage the mortgage independently, but it would stretch them. It would require discipline. It would require accountability. I folded the papers neatly and placed them back in the folder. That evening I called Daniel and told him I would remain on the loan for one more year under one condition. Public acknowledgement. Not extravagant. Not dramatic. Simply honest. At the next family gathering, he would speak clearly about the support that had helped build their foundation. Not as repayment. As recognition. He agreed without hesitation. His voice was steady. I believed him. A year is not a lifetime. It is a test. When I hung up, I walked into my backyard and looked at the roses again. Some had begun to close as dusk approached. They did not demand attention. They simply responded to care and correction. Respect works the same way. It grows where it is tended and fades where it is neglected. For the first time since that night in the ballroom, I felt certain that the balance had been restored. Not because I had forced it, but because I had required it. The next family gathering arrived sooner than I expected. Emily decided to host a small Sunday lunch at their house, something simple and informal. Just the three of us. No colleagues. No extended relatives. No microphones. The air carried the first hint of autumn, cool but gentle, and the trees along their street had begun to shift from deep green to muted gold. I arrived precisely at 1 o'clock, carrying a small apple pie I had baked that morning. Daniel opened the door himself. He stepped aside without hesitation and greeted me with a steady, respectful tone. There was no theatrical warmth, no exaggerated enthusiasm, just acknowledgement. Inside, the dining table had been set carefully. 3 plates, cloth napkins, no distractions. I noticed the difference immediately. Intentional simplicity often signals seriousness. We sat down together, and for a few moments the conversation remained light. Work updates. Weather. A neighbor who had recently moved. Then Daniel cleared his throat. He did not stand. He did not perform. He simply looked at me directly and said that before we began eating, he wanted to say something clearly. His voice did not project. It did not seek applause. It carried intention. He said that the house we were sitting in would not exist without my support. He said that 5 years ago, when he lacked the credit strength to secure the mortgage alone, I had stepped forward without hesitation. He acknowledged that my trust had provided stability at a critical moment. Then he said that he had taken that support for granted and had reduced it to a joke. The word joke sounded different when spoken in quiet honesty. He said he was grateful. Not casually. Not in passing. Directly. Emily reached for my hand under the table. I felt the warmth of her fingers and the tension release from her shoulders. I did not rush to respond. Silence has weight when it follows sincerity. I told Daniel that acknowledgement restores balance more effectively than apology alone. I told him that growth is not measured by income or titles, but by awareness. He nodded slowly. There was no defensiveness left in his posture. Only understanding. Lunch proceeded calmly after that. The food was simple. Roasted chicken, salad, fresh bread. Conversation shifted toward practical plans for the coming year. Budget adjustments. Long-term savings goals. Daniel spoke openly about restructuring their finances to reduce dependence on my co-borrower status. He asked for my perspective on managing debt strategically. For the first time, he sought guidance without ego. I answered honestly, not as a benefactor, but as someone who had learned through decades of careful planning. After dessert, Daniel brought out a folder. Inside were updated financial projections showing how they intended to lower their debt ratio within 12 months. He placed it on the table between us. Not as proof, as commitment. I reviewed the numbers quietly. They were realistic, conservative, thoughtful. I closed the folder and slid it back to him. I told him I would remain on the mortgage as agreed, but that this year would be about independence, not reliance. He agreed without hesitation. When I stood to leave, Daniel walked me to my car. The sky was pale blue, the afternoon light soft against the driveway. He thanked me again, this time without embellishment. I told him that gratitude is not something you say once. It is something you practice. As I drove home, I felt something settle into place. Not superiority, not triumph. Stability. Respect had been recalibrated, not demanded. No one had raised their voice. No one had been humiliated. The correction had come through clarity and consequence. That evening, I placed the empty pie dish in my sink and looked around my quiet kitchen. The house felt the same as it always had. But the dynamic had changed. Daniel no longer saw me as background support or convenient humor. He saw the structure beneath the celebration. And sometimes, that is the only recognition that truly matters. A year passes more quickly than most people expect. Seasons turn quietly, bills arrive and are paid. Routines settle into patterns that feel permanent until they are not. Over the next 12 months, Daniel did exactly what he had promised at that small dining table. There were no grand announcements, no dramatic declarations, just steady adjustments. They reduced discretionary spending. They refinanced a small car loan. They redirected bonuses toward principal payments instead of vacations. I did not supervise. I did not remind. I observed. True change does not need monitoring when it is chosen willingly. In early spring, Daniel called to tell me they were ready to apply for refinancing independently. His voice carried a different tone now. Not the sharp confidence of someone eager to impress a room. Not the strained humility of someone correcting a mistake. It sounded grounded, measured. He explained that their updated credit profile and reduced debt ratio met the bank's requirements for a stable rate. He asked if I would join them at the bank to finalize the transition. I agreed. The branch looked the same as it had a year before. Neutral walls, quiet conversations behind glass partitions. Thomas greeted us again, recognizing my name from the file. The documents were placed neatly before us. This time, my role was different. I was there to step back, not to step forward. Daniel signed first. Emily followed. Then I signed the release removing my name from the mortgage. The pen moved smoothly across the paper. 5 years of shared obligation ended in a single steady motion. When it was done, Daniel looked at me directly and said thank you. Not loudly, not for effect, simply and clearly. As we walked out into the afternoon light, he paused beside the entrance. He said that he had learned more about responsibility in the past year than in the entire year of his promotion. I told him promotions change titles. Consequences change character. He nodded slowly, absorbing the distinction. A few weeks later, there was another gathering at their house. Nothing formal, just family. This time, Daniel stood in the kitchen while we were clearing plates and said, without prompting, that he wanted to acknowledge something in front of everyone present. He did not dramatize it. He did not over-explain. He said that when he and Emily first bought their home, they had done so because I believed in them enough to carry risk on their behalf. He said that belief deserved respect, not humor. The room was quiet. No forced laughter. No applause. Just understanding settling gently over the table. I did not respond with a speech. I simply met his eyes and inclined my head slightly. Recognition had been restored, not demanded. That evening, as I drove home, I thought back to that ballroom and the sentence that had shifted everything. It had taken less than 10 seconds to speak, but it had revealed more than Daniel intended. What he had mistaken for harmless wit had exposed imbalance. What I chose to do afterward restored it. I did not shout. I did not threaten. I adjusted the structure beneath the surface. Support, when offered, is a gift, but a gift without respect becomes a liability. I pulled into my driveway and turned off the engine, sitting for a moment in the quiet. The porch light glowed steadily, just as it always had. My house had not changed. My finances were secure. My relationships were clearer. I stepped out of the car and looked up at the darkening sky. Confidence amplified through a microphone can impress a crowd for a night. Integrity demonstrated through action reshapes a lifetime. Daniel had learned that gratitude must be visible, and I had been reminded that dignity does not require noise. It requires boundaries. Sometimes the most powerful sentence in a room is not the one spoken into a microphone. It is the one spoken calmly afterward, when the audience is gone.